Beyond the Megawatt is proudly powered by our Tier 1 sponsor, Ironbox. Welcome everyone to Beyond the Megawatt. We're so excited to have our guest today, Kate Ahl. With over 2 decades of experience collaborating with writers and researchers and educational professionals, she has a deep understanding of the challenges of high-pressure creative and intellectual work. And that really sits well with folks in the high-tech industry and engineering and construction. And those are just really those competitive environments that she likes to focus on. Now, she's got 2 decades of academic and scholarly publishing and trained in integrative psychotherapist in in-house therapy at Cambridge University, where she actually set the programs there that they currently have. Currently, she's facilitating workshops aimed at helping driven and deeply interested people with outlier minds achieve greater balance. And so we all need a little bit of that. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining us. Now,
Yes,
what did I not say that the audience should know about you?
Gosh, well, I worked first as a publisher, and so I worked with people who were trying to bring their ideas to fruition. And through that, I got a really good idea of not just some of the difficulties of creating intellectual work under pressure, but also some of the difficulties of working in very highly competitive environments. And so it was that really sort of took me into training as a psychotherapist, because that felt like in some ways the more important piece of bringing people's work to the world is helping people to collaborate, because research is collaborative, and also helping people to be okay enough in themselves to continue bringing the important work that they're doing to light.
Oh, that's wonderful.
This is a good time for me to talk about why we brought you on, because Valerie and I wanted to do kind of an opening episode of why we're here and our backstories. And then we were like, okay, I have my perspective, you have your perspective, but then there's the whole other world out there. There's other women, there's men, there's diversified perspectives and life's experiences. And we need to make sure that we have somebody who can kind of check us, add some validation to what we're saying, and then correct us when we're wrong or making some assumptions or bias, unconscious bias.
Unconscious biases, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, tell me what your perspectives are.
Mara, do you want to tell us a little bit about you? And before you start, I want to remind our audience, we are going to drop an audacious question at the end.
Yes.
And so you want to wait till the end to get this audacious question. And Kate is actually going to answer it from an outsider perspective through her experiences. We're very excited about this. I know all the inquiring minds are going to want to know this. It's going to be a good one. So stay tuned. But Mara, tell us a little bit about how you entered into the industry.
Yeah. So Mara, with Mara J Consulting, and it did take me a little over 20 years to kind of figure out I like to be on my own. But I was going to school at the time, still trying to figure out my path. I grew up with a father who was a tradesman. I did like working with him hands-on. He was a tile setter. So I liked that, but I also liked I saw a lot of, I guess, successful women dress nice. They were journalists. That was kind of my first watching TV, and Barbara Walters.
Yes.
I was like, okay, that seems like something I would really like to do. Just what I saw. So I was into journalism, psychology. I did a lot of things in school that were administratively oriented, getting really good at computers and technology and all things. I had an office job during the day. I was going to school, and I was a waitress at night. And I had a table that was a technology company and asked me to come work for them. Wow. And I was Corning in Hickory, and I stayed with them for almost close to 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was through that I was introduced into technology, and I saw a lot of opportunity there. And then over the course of the years, I've now fast forward from technology more into real estate development. So it's just recently kind of pivoted with my company and where I'm focused. So I had kind of an unusual way of entering into the IT industry and now the data center industry.
Wow. How long has that been, like, total reign from the moment you kind of started with Corning until now? That's a long time.
Yeah. 99 is when I started. Wow. Yeah. At Cornell.
Yeah. That's phenomenal. So it's a long journey. So for me, yeah, totally different angle, which is why we are doing this podcast together, because we do come from it from two different angles. When for me, it was really, I grew up on a construction site working on my dad's projects. And he was a residential custom home builder. And so I learned very, very quickly how to build a house from the ground up, growing in that environment. When he retired and went to Florida, I tried to get a job in the industry as a tradesperson, and I didn't really know about unions or how that all worked at all. And so I thought, well, to be taken seriously, I was going to have to go to college. And so I did. I ended up getting an industrial technology degree, which is basically construction management for high tech. And I, from there, was on my very first commercial project, which was a data center in Chicago. I remember thinking, what is a data center? And it just looked like a big warehouse to me for the most part. And I found it just completely fascinating. It had so many generators, and they were still printing. This is before BIM was just really kind of starting to be discussed. They were printing out all of the beautiful prints on and hanging them on the wall. And they had a shredder to shred it all when it was done. And I kept wanting to take them home because I thought it was like art. I wanted to frame it and put it on my wall. They're like, oh, no. We have to destroy these. And that's when I learned how secret data centers were. Yeah. And it's probably why we all don't know what a data center is still to this day, because it was very secret. So that's where I started. And the rest is sort of history. I've spent my years of working in the field, either building them or on the pre-construction side, planning to launch them and estimating them, working on the general contractor side and the owner side. And I just really love the idea of understanding the entire build cycle. So I've worn all of the hats from end to end, and constantly, as soon as I hear about something new, just researching and getting more certificates and more credentials. And as soon as trying to understand data, studying data analytics, or understanding AI and getting certified in AI. So it's just like this continuous learning has always been a huge piece of my life. And sometimes I question, like, why am I constantly wanting to learn? Am I showing up because I feel like I need to prove myself or to be taken seriously? I've got to have all of these boxes checked in my mind. So I have a lot of education, but a lot of hands-on experience as well, which has made me pretty well-rounded. At first, I thought I was holding myself back, but now I can really see the whole picture when I look at something. So I don't think I held myself back anymore by doing that. So that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention Valerie and I both, we definitely came from two different perspectives. She's kind of earned her stripes through education and hands-on experience. And I didn't have a degree in construction and technology. And so I learned I was very fortunate because when I started at Corning, they put me into the field before I ever answered the phone. I learned how to splice, learned how to terminate connectors. I traveled with the engineers. Throughout my 12 years at Corning, I did a lot of hands-on. I did all the trainings, right? Mm-hmm. So I just want to kind of, our focus through this podcast is kind of highlighting skilled trade. And there's a number of ways that you can actually enter into the industry. And I think that's one perspective that we just kind of wanted to share and highlight.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how did you two meet each other? How did you come together, and what was behind sort of this project of yours?
Well, I think this is a great opportunity, Mara. I know you're a bit ready to say, but I think this is a great opportunity to talk about the tight-knit women's group that you have here, and how I was really looking for that. And if it weren't for Carrie, who's a part of that group, who started this social group that allowed us to join women virtually across all of the world, if you think about it, that's initially how we were brought together.
That's right. So Carrie Getz has done a really good job. She actually has a book, Jumpstart Your Career in Data Centers. So if you have,
and Polly Pockets, if you're looking for something for children around that. Yep.
But Carrie has been a trailblazer in the industry for years. Mm-hmm. I think she won the Luminary Award this past year. But Carrie did form an online group on LinkedIn that I joined, and I knew a lot of women already in the industry. And from that group, we also, I think maybe Emily Sullivan may have started it, but we started this WhatsApp group as well. And we just started putting together, the WhatsApp group is pretty cool because we actually have now a platform where women could join. Then as we planned for events, that's how it all started. We were like, okay, we are all going to the same events. Let's get ahead of this thing and actually collaborate. Mm-hmm. And some of it was like we just didn't want to be alone at an event. We don't know anybody, but some of it was like, let's start talking about who we want to meet with. Who are you trying to get in front of? Do you want to speak at the events? Do we need speakers? We need all these things. And so through that group, Valerie and I somehow connected. I think you realized I had just started my company, and she started hers before I had started mine.
Haven't even mentioned that.
Yeah, she started her company about 6 or 7 months before I started mine. And I think she reached out to me and she said, hey, we probably need to talk because it looks like you and I are kind of on the same track of having our own business. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do. And I learned more about what she did. And that's kind of how we started. So over the course of the last 12 months, we've just kind of formed a friendship virtually. Yeah. We had never met in person. This was all virtual.
Actually, our first time we met in person was when we announced our launch at Goddess in a World.
She asked me, we laugh about it.
Yes.
I say she proposed to me online or virtually.
You're my voice partner.
Yes. And I said yes virtually. And then when we saw in person at Goddess in a World, we were like, okay, I said yes. And now you're here and we're done doing this thing.
Yeah. Well, we have some key things. Which one do you want to start with? I know that from a female in the industry, I have a perspective that we have a long way to go and that we need to do some more education around what it means to be, what allyship, what good looks like with allyship. I feel like we have a long way to go with that. And I also love this group that you all have created here. And I want to carry that forward out west as well, because in the bottom of my heart, and it's one of the reasons why I'm like, how can I uplift you? How can I support you? And I just wasn't seeing that in my environment. And so that's so contagious. And that's my heart. How do I learn? Like, how did you create that? And I wanted to learn from you too on what that looked like. And so through that, I think you've shared with me some different perspective that's really opened my eyes to think a little differently. I'd love you to share.
Yeah. So this comes down to like two topics we can start with. One is how have we built this male allyship here? And she's referring to our little tribe here in Loudoun County, which I just moved here last year. So I kind of count myself as now part of the area here. But it took I can't take ownership for it. There are a lot of folks here, men and women, who have worked alongside each other, built each other up across, and it starts within organizations like 7x24, AFCOM, iMasons, which I'm the Eastern U.S. chair, but I've seen within these groups, they actually have formed committees and boards with men and women where we actually learn to work alongside each other. And I would just say we just do it really well here.
Really well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a friend of mine actually shared with me a workshop that he did on male allyship, and it really opened up my eyes to a few things too, because as I'm talking through and thinking through this, because we have created this little beautiful environment here in Northern Virginia where we work alongside each other and we see our male and female peers as one and equals. There's also this perception that we've made all this progress, and it could even be from our personal experiences or just what others are seeing from the outside looking in. We just had that happen this morning where there was a post about a book, and it was about women in construction, and there was a perspective, a comment that said, well, let's celebrate all the success. And
we're at 25% now. We're at 25% of more women in this industry. But that's not 25%.
And and also where we see from what we see on social media, what we see at the events, what we see even at our little happy hours and our get-togethers, and even what I experience here with our little tribe here, there's still a lot happening behind the scenes. There's still a lot of people getting left behind. And there's still a lot, if we look at like diversifying our workforce and our panels, even though we're seeing more women at these events and more women on the panels, we still have a diversity issue. Still have an issue with getting more women into the industry. I think because we see what we see on social media, we think the problem is fixed. But the reason we created this podcast is because not everybody can even get to those events. Not everybody can get to. So I think what we see on social media and at these events is not a representation of these job sites. Because if you drive by any of these data centers, we see mostly men. It is very seldom that I drive out here and see women out on the job site. So even though we're making progress and visually, from what we see on social media, LinkedIn, events and things, yes, we're seeing more women, but I think maybe you could speak to this as well.
Yeah. So what's happening though is it's that early exposure, and I believe that it's root cause. Like I always think about, well, why? I'm always asking questions, and when I dig down further, I realize that, and from just personal experience, and I share my stories online, that early exposure is where we're planting the seed. And then we got to continue watering it because, and I don't know, maybe you can validate this, but I read studies that by the time they get to high school, their biases are pretty set on their career paths and what those mean to you and who belongs in them. So when we think about the world of STEM and academia and who we see entering into some of those STEM careers, it's still predominantly male. We're not, and although with all these programs out there, yes, we're doing better, yay. But it's the exposure. We still don't have enough representation to show that. So, I mean, it's why that I think that hitting the children at a very early age, for them to see someone different than what they would see when they drive by a construction site, or what they see online or in social media, or even their own parents at home. The majority of them are not in those because we're still so underrepresented. And so if we're going to close that gap faster, we have to start with planting the seeds early and getting that exposure early. Would you agree with that? Or am I don't know. You haven't certainly studied these types of things. So.
Well, I mean, and I've worked with a lot of women who have come up through scientific careers. And what they very often say to me is it was never an issue that I wasn't interested or I didn't think that these roles were accessible to me. We were taught science in school. Why wouldn't I feel like I could be a scientist? But it is this kind of, as you say, the sort of representation within sort of media and within just sort of the world around us, that actually very often it is men who have this idea that this is an industry that's for me and it's not for these other people because I am like the people who I see represented in it. So actually we very often present this as this is a problem with women not seeing that they're able to do these things. And sure, women aren't seeing themselves represented in those worlds, but boys and girls are getting the same education. So there comes this point in a lot of women's careers where they say, well, I've been told I need to understand science and I need to understand math and I'm graded on it and I'm made to do it and I'm doing well in it and I'm enjoying it and everyone wants me to enjoy it. And then there comes this point where somehow the ranks close and they're not able to progress in that way. And it's not because they don't want to or they don't think it's for them. And then it gets into, once you're in sort of workplace policies, it gets into sort of lots of family unfriendly working environments, lots of working environments that don't really prioritize sort of work-life balance. And also women run into this problem where, again, it's just assumed that they will want to do the emotional caretaking for teams, that they will do a lot more of the sort of cleaning up of data, a lot of the sort of housekeeping tasks involved in sort of science and data work, and are not put forward for training opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the problem is, as you say, one of representation, definitely. But there's also this feeling very much that comes from a lot of men, whether they realize it or not, that this is men's work. This is sort of a man's world and women can be in it in this kind of tangential way. So that's where the unconscious bias, I think, comes in.
Yeah, I also think that I wonder if there's, and I've always believed that no one intentionally wakes up and says, I want to exclude you. No, I think it is very much unconscious. So I try to have that perspective in the forefront of my mind. And I see that a lot of times that we do attract or we want to bring in people who are like us.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that, like when you see someone who has at least this has been my observation in corporate world, is if the leader is of a diverse background, mm-hmm. and female, Black, so forth, their teams tend to be more diverse than those who are white. They tend to be in all particularly one type of background. That's just an observation.
Yeah, I think it's more about not just that they look like them, but I think we also bring people along with us that we relate to, that we relate to in some way. Those are the people that we build our teams around, and we kind of go through life with, and we bring with us, and from all those perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is that something that, just because it is my observation, would you agree that we bring the same type of folks around us to, I don't know what drives that.
I think a lot of it, if you sort of think about it in terms of what you were just saying now, Mara, that it's people we relate to. And when we're choosing people to collaborate with, part of what happens is, we will go for people with whom communication is most seamless. I understand what you're saying. You understand what I'm saying. We're operating in the same kind of context. And that's why, in order to kind of make workplaces more diverse and more inclusive, we all need to work on sort of cross-cultural communication so that we can just make that communication easier amongst all of ourselves, and we can bring in a wider diversity of talent and viewpoints and perspectives. But it's not necessarily, it's like you said, people don't wake up sort of going, I don't like people who are different than me and I want to exclude them. Some people do, but most people are just looking to kind of work as effortlessly and as seamlessly as possible with the people around them. And what we want to do is just make that easier to do for a wider range of people with a wider range of people.
So I've always felt like that Fred groupthink though, right? So you don't have a diverseness of thought. Mm-hmm. And so when you do get someone who thinks differently, and you think of that neurodivergent mind, and I am neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. So think about someone who thinks differently and who's sitting there asking questions, and they don't see, what everybody else is calling a duck. I see a octopus. And I see something that's maybe out of control, to where they're like, no, what you see is a duck. It quacks like a duck. It walks like a duck. It's a duck, Valerie. I still don't see a duck. I see an octopus. I see something that's smart, but has a lot of arms and move in a lot of directions. And I just see it very differently. And I will challenge you, and I will ask questions. And then I'm looked at as someone who's difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm not even trying to be difficult. I just see it differently. And I see it a more improved way, or I can streamline this, or I can work smarter, or I can solve this problem. And so I jump right into this type of thinking.
Yeah.
You're going to say something.
I was just going to say, I think from my studies in school and some of the things that I've learned over the years, I think that one of the biggest things that we can do, obviously communication, we should always be trying to improve communication, how we relate to each other.
Agreed.
And we could get into the sciences of the love languages and all these things. The way that I love and receive love is not the same way that you love and receive love. And it's the same kind of translates into the way that I think and the way that I work and produce and that I'm productive can be completely different than how you think and how you work and how you're productive. We were listening to Huberman this morning, and he even talks about how different times of the day and we all kind of show up differently. And you might be a morning person, right, which you are. And I'm a slow burn during the day. Like, I like to wake up slowly. And so we just kind of all show up differently, not just our life experiences, but just genetically and physically and how we show up every day.
Yeah. But Kate, you were about ready to ask me a question, I think, as well.
I think it was around sort of neurodivergence and the fact that, of course, in lots, and this is a stereotype, but it's also borne out in my experience of working with people in sort of tech industries and in science, and that there is more neurodiversity in STEM subjects generally, and that sometimes it's not realistic to expect that we'll all be able to understand each other all the time. And that's where sometimes it's just really helpful to have a third party. That's why it's really helpful to have people who are skilled at facilitating meetings and at kind of translating people to one another and at sort of mediating and facilitating. And that's why those skills, which not everyone has and not everyone is really able to develop, because we are all different and we have different sort of skill sets. But that's why that's so important in teams as well, is to have people who are very trained and very specialized in helping people communicate with one another. Because
and that's what I was thinking about too. I just lost my train of thought. Was when we're when we're hiring and building teams, we put them through this personality profile test, and we kind of like, all right, I'm the manager. I'm learning how to manage you, and I'm going to share a little bit about you so you can kind of know how I lead. We don't always have that opportunity in real life. We can't really take a personality test every time we engage with somebody, but we can get better at not looking always internal, but trying to like look outwardly at saying, hey, let me watch and observe how this person is showing up. And so that I can, not saying we all have to be alike because we all have our strengths and weaknesses, but figuring out a way to kind of relate to each other, right, in a better, more powerful way, because that goes back to this allyship of men and women. We were created, we are different. As much as we want to be treated as equals, men and women genetically were created differently. We show up differently. We have different strengths and weaknesses. And I think even if you put you and another male construction successful leader, there are going to be a lot of similarities. There's going to be things that you both show up and do, but we all are present ourselves in different ways. And I think it is important that we don't lose sight of that. And that's what I want to touch back on, something that's really important. It's something that keeps coming up in our industry is, why do women need to have these exclusive times together? Why are you doing these women groups?
Yes.
But I want to back up, because when this first started happening, I was already halfway through my career when these women groups started, and I didn't want to be a part of them because I was like, wait a minute, I've been working so hard to not be excluded and seen as different, and now you want me to be a part of a women only group? Well, now you're separating me again, and I don't want it. So I kind of pushed back. And what I've learned is that women do need each other, men need each other, but women especially, I think, for what we've learned in the industry, and I think we learn things in a very tough way.
Yes.
We've talked a little bit about this, is when we entered the trade, women, some of the people that were hardest on me were other women. And I know I wanted to change that for the other young women who are coming into the industry. So those are those conversations, but there's also conversations that we as women face that we need to talk about internally. And we're not over there. I don't want the men to think that we're hibernating in these little rooms and just talking about men and how all the terrible things. We're actually talking about things that we need to work on as women, right? It's a woman to woman conversation. Most of our conversations are, we're harder on ourselves and checking ourselves in these rooms more than we're calling out men in these rooms. And so I want to kind of just highlight that, because I keep hearing that across the industry is, oh, there's another women's group. Oh, there's another exclusive women's only. Now, what I do want to say is we are kind of pivoting that and making it a point to make sure that men feel welcome into these groups that appear as women only. We want to make them more inclusive. Kate, we talked a little bit about this too, about there are men being left behind. There are men that are struggling in their careers. There are displaced workers. There are men that have been unemployed for, 6 months, 18 months. And so I think there's things that we do that women get really vulnerable. So as much as we might need our little time to be alone, I think we need to really do more to get in rooms together where we can talk about the masking of emotions that men are prone to do and get them to be more comfortable in talking through some of the challenges that they have in the workplace. So I don't know if
or even the fears that they have about having a woman on their team. There's that piece as well. I think we could probably segue off into 3 or 4 different additional about these subjects, but we'll pause to give some insights to all of that.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because I think I really hear what you're saying about, Mara, your experience of, I don't want to be yet again sort of segregated off on the basis of my being a woman. I'm already othered enough in this, but also this feeling of, it is important, I think, for any person who has some sort of minority status in a population to just be able to speak to other people who share their experience. And I think that is important, and it's not exclusionary. It's a support group, right? And it's a support group on the basis of sort of one thing you have in common. It would be great if people could just let people support each other a bit more without trying to sort of gatekeep it and police it. But also what you're saying about women aren't the only beneficiaries of a sort of more inclusive and more balanced workplace, that a lot of men also feel left behind by what is often a very antagonistic, a very competitive kind of culture. And the thing is that not all men want to talk about their emotions or want to be vulnerable in that way. It's not all culture. Some of it is just sort of who people are. When I was doing my psychotherapy training, part of our diversity module was about how therapy is a very feminine culture, actually, and that what we very often ask men to do is to be more like women in therapy. And how can we help people just be who they are, but behave ethically to one another? And I think that maybe is a really important focus, is how can we come away from identity, come away from who needs to change and be different from who they are, and just really focus on ethics. Is how can we just have an ethical framework that honors and respects everyone?
Well, I imagine that macho mentality is developed at a very young age,
Mhm.
and we're told that they're not allowed to have emotions to where women are. We're told very, very quickly, very young, hey, well, if your friend fell down on the playground, us girls would go around them and say, oh, are you okay? And the boys are like, brush it off. Boys shouldn't cry. You're fine. Get up. And so it develops this early on empathy, which I think is the root to emotional intelligence. And so when I hear people say, oh, women are more emotionally intelligent, I'm like, well, we've had more practice and been given permission to develop that.
Well, and women have also have been tasked with emotional caretaking of other people in a way that we don't see happening with boys to the same extent. I mean, one of the reasons, that's been put forward for why women and girls tend to be underdiagnosed with autistic spectrum conditions is that the pressure to mask is much, much, much higher on women. We're much more indulgent of men who are very direct and abrupt. That doesn't fly with women. Women face very stiff social penalties for not being friendly and open and engaging and facilitative and all of those sorts of things. So it goes both ways. And I think a lot is changing in how we raise children for the better. But I also sort of think that there will also be just some natural variation within people, and helping people to communicate across that variation is really helpful.
I like that. You reminded me of I was in my 20s or early 30s, and a girlfriend said she came up and we kind of knew each other, but not, and she hugged me, and I didn't really hug her back, but that's just how I related to it. She was like, oh, you're not a hugger. And I was like, oh, am I supposed to be a hugger? My mom didn't hug me. So I'm like, I'm not a hugger. But women are, for the most part, they're huggers. They're taught they could be touchy-feely. And it's the men who are kind of like, we don't show emotions, we don't hug, we don't kiss each other. And women do. But in my experience, my life experience was we didn't really hug a whole lot. So I'm a woman and I'm not a hugger. So then I had to learn how to hug. I was like, I feel like I'm a better hugger. In fact, this girlfriend, she actually says, oh, she kind of like, she knows I'm working on this thing. I've been working on it over the years. So she's like, oh, that was a nice hug. That's a good hug.
Aww.
Yeah. So
I love that. Well, we've come to the point where we want to ask the audacious question.
All right.
And one of the things we're seeing in the industry is here we're trying to create a more inclusive, diverse teams, but we're also seeing women are leaving as fast as we get them in. And so, audacious question is, what's in it for men to have a more inclusive workspace? And therefore, we've got to focus on that culture that we're developing to ensure that we maintain it.
Yeah, and that's such a good question. Like, what's in it for men? Because I think very often what men can feel is we're always being told we're not doing enough and we need to do more and we're being bad and we're being sexist. And that can lead to a lot of fragility, I think, among men. And I think what is really not often made clear about allyship, but about having more inclusive workplaces generally, is that men benefit as well from being given more freedom to step out of the sort of restrictive roles that we've been in. And I think of my own experience having worked in the UK for the past 30 years, where employment laws are quite different. And men recently have sort of been able to access shared parental leave. And this has really shifted a focus in workplaces away from this idea that some policies are for women and there's sort of special dispensations to the women employees, more to a feeling of they support society as a whole. These are family-friendly policies that include men. And men have this opportunity to sort of spend time at home with their infants that they didn't have in previous generations. So a lot of the things that sort of make workplaces more attractive places for women to be also work to make them more attractive places for men to be. There tends to be sort of less bullying in more diverse teams, and there tends to be sort of more of a focus on sort of holistic well-being and getting along with each other. And so it's not necessarily that having more women in a workplace sort of means less for men. We need to get out of, I think, this very polarized idea of if someone makes progress or makes strides, it's at the expense of other people. But sort of as a sort of species as a whole, we can really benefit from everyone being more comfortable, everyone having more opportunities, more work-life balance.
Yeah, I personally, I've seen that in the construction industry where men are shamed if they want to take parental leave when they have a baby.
Yeah.
Then we wonder why the men don't have a solid bond with their child, but then that actually hurts the women when they come into that industry. And they're trying to not only show up as an equal, but now their only choice is to have a baby, and they are the ones that have to have a baby. And so it's this weird, strange place that now I've got a husband who can't take off, so I can go back to work because we're shaming them, and we can't create this balance. And it's a lot of pressure, I think, on both sides.
Do you know where I love this? There's some real benefits that COVID brought us, right? And I think one of them was, yes, all of our houses got nicer because we worked on them, we painted the walls and stuff because we had started them. But one of the things that came out of the pandemic was I remember the first time I was on a video call for a virtual conference, and my boss was at home and he had his kid on his knee, and he did a full meeting with our entire team with his kid, and there was some crazy stuff going around and things like that. But then it got more common. And I think when I first saw this man at home with his kid on his lap, I was like, what is this? Something about my body. It was just an image I wasn't even used to seeing. And then over the next couple of years, I kind of continued to see that. And I think we saw men at home, two things. I think because both men and women we had couples that both were working, but the women just traditionally were the ones that could ask their bosses to stay home with a sick kid. And just the other day, I had a business partner who had to stay home with the kids because the wife had something going on. So I think now that's one benefit I would say is we've kind of I would love to see more of a shift in that direction, but that is just one thing that I noticed. Yeah.
I think we could go on and on. There's just so much good nuggets here we could expand off of, but we really appreciate your time and coming on here and interviewing us and letting us share our stories. And so any last things you would like to say, Kate?
Gosh,
shots, anything like that. I'd love to just highlight you.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, basically that I just love working with people who have problem solving minds. And I think that's what both of you have been talking about in your careers and among the people you work with of there are particular issues to do with being a systems thinker, having a problem solving mind, having a sort of restless, hungry mind that needs to learn things a lot. And that is a really interesting thing in terms of that's not normally thought of as being a feminine trait. And so it's just wonderful to be able to see this kind of celebrated and to see women's presence in STEM industries sort of being highlighted in the way you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, if there's something that we've said today that maybe we missed something completely, and we will, we can't cover everything in these, but if there's something that really resonated that you want to hear from, reach out to us. Our email address
will be tagged in the show, so you'll be able to add that.
Yep.
All of our LinkedIn and social handles, including Kate's social handles, will be tagged as well. So if you want to reach out to her about these workshops and maybe even bring them into your own companies, I think that would be really beneficial. So we'll put all of those tags in the episode.
Yeah. So thank you for bearing with us through our first episode.
Yes.
We're really excited. We have a lot of guests in the future that we'll be announcing very soon. So
Appreciate it.
Exciting.
Thank you, Kate.
Yes.
Yeah. And thanks for hanging out in my living room today.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And thank you for meeting all my pets. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to be on here. So thank you very much for having me.
Hi. Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Thanks to Ironbox for helping us launch with power.